Movies have always had music as a part of them. When Thomas Edison was making his first film projector, it was intended to be an added feature to his phonograph, but he couldn't quite get the tech to work together, so he just made a silent camera and projector. But films, they were almost never shown silently. The early films without recorded sound were usually accompanied by live music to help the story work emotionally. And some movie houses, they'd even have people doing sound effects or actors reading the inner title cards. Music, it's so important to film storytelling. It can give the audience the cues to be able to relate to the story. And it just makes the film feel complete. The edits, they become less jarring. The whole thing will usually flow better once the music is added. So let's look at a couple of examples. I'm going to use Splash and Jaws, two movies that have very important underwater sequences, but that couldn't feel more different from each other. Jaws, I'm pretty sure you know, was intended to make the ocean a pretty scary place. But in Splash, the director Ron Howard told the composer Lee Holdridge to make the ocean to feel warm and comforting, inviting. Now, if you haven't seen those films, they're both really good, and you may want to watch them just for fun, but also for reference for this. And as an example, I took some of the playful underwater music from Splash and put it on an early scene from Jaws, the first one where the shark shows up. Take a look. Now that ending, it doesn't quite work, but up to there, what's originally a very suspenseful scene, it becomes almost romantic. With a little color correction to make it a softer blue, it would actually be a really nice, peaceful scene. Right up until her head gets pulled under the water, at which point that music just doesn't work anymore. And that's another important thing about music. It's incredibly powerful, but it can't just change things. The scene is what the scene is, and while the music can help push the scene towards a direction, and it can definitely pull out subtle details, it can't really change what's there on the screen. It's incredibly powerful, but only to a point. So let's talk about some practical uses of music. First off, what kind of music do you want to use? Now, I'd recommend staying away from any music with vocals in it, for two reasons. First off, the vocal track, often it's just going to start fighting in the soundtrack with the interview and make it harder to understand what's being said. Music without vocals can usually fit in the soundtrack around the dialogue, but those vocal tracks are they're going to fight for attention and steal it from the interview, which is what you want people listening to. And the other reason to stay away from music with vocals, it's part of a larger idea, and this is kind of weird, but stay with me. Generally, you don't want what you might consider to be good music as the score to your project. The music, it's meant to augment the emotion of your project and not really to be listened to by itself. So it tends to be a little simple, probably a little repetitive, maybe even a little boring. And I don't mean to insult film scores or the people who write them. There's amazing music out there that's written for films, but most of the time the music, it's not intended to stand alone. It's meant to be played under a film scene. It's very, very, very important, but it doesn't need to be great music. It needs to be effective. As an example, for a while, I used to use two different music subscription services. I was making a lot of videos that needed music, like what we're talking about here, score music to go underneath the interviews, but I was also making a lot of videos with fast-moving visuals and titles that needed music that could stand on its own to go with it. Music that you would just want to listen to on its own. The one subscription that I had, it had the less interesting music that was great for interviews. The second one had much better standalone music. So that's why to use music and what to look for. And then in the next lesson, we'll start to get a little more specific.